Hey, it's Brett, and you're watching Brett and Some Books. And today we are continuing Who Ate the First Oyster by Cody Cassidy. We're on chapter 4, which is Who Invented Clothing. If the time of our species on Earth were a day, this happened at 2:34 in the afternoon, about 107,000 years ago. When our hominin ancestors first branched off the chimpanzee and bonobo line, they hosted but a single species of blood-sucking, fur-living parasite, Pediculus humanus capitis, also known as the head louse. It has lived on hominins for at least 6 million years and lives in our hair to this day. But the head louse isn't the only species of louse we host. Over the past 6 million years, we have brought aboard two more species of blood-sucking parasites, the pubic louse and the body louse. We picked up the pubic louse approximately 3 million years ago, when an ancestor of ours and a gorilla shared sleeping spaces, though probably not at the same time. Sometime later, the body louse, which clings to clothes instead of hair, emerged. The result is that today we host 3 times as many species of lice as any other primate. However, this seedy chapter of our evolution has a silver lining. Thanks to these parasites, biologists have been able to answer what seemed like an impossible question. When, where, and why did we begin wearing clothes? Clothing is made of organic material, which means unlike stone or bone, it leaves no fossil evidence. Thus, its origin has long been an open question. Up until recently, many archaeologists believed hominins lost their fur after the invention of clothing made it unnecessary. As clothes are, in one sense, removable fur, scholars believed that at some point hominins upgraded from permanent warmth to warmth on demand. It's a sensible theory, but one that geneticists have recently discovered is spectacularly incorrect. In 2002, David Reed, a curator of mammals at the Florida Museum of Natural History, analyzed the DNA of both the common head louse and the body louse and discovered that they did not diverge simultaneously from a common ancestor. Instead, the body louse evolved directly from the head louse. Presumably, he wrote, this occurred when Homo sapiens first donned clothing and inadvertently provided the head louse with a new habitat. When Reed dated the divergence, he arrived at an astonishing result. Our ancestors spent a rather staggering amount of time naked. According to Reed, the first person to wear clothes lived approximately 107,000 years ago. Yet the geneticist Alan Rogers has determined hominin skin color changed from chimp-like pale pink to UV-protecting darker hues some 1.2 million years ago, suggesting hominin body hair had by then thinned to an immodest degree. How then did hominins survive for so long without fur or clothes? And most importantly, who ended the million-year streak of nudity? I'll call him Ralph, after Ralph Lauren, because the evidence suggests that when our Ralph made his insight, he was interested in fashion as much as function, and I'll call him a him because in truth I don't know. I flipped a coin. Ralph was a modern Homo sapiens, born 107,000 years ago in Africa, perhaps in South Africa. Many researchers believe that if Ralph were placed in a time machine, we could learn his language and he could learn ours. They believe he had a modern mind, fully capable of symbolic thought and cognitively indistinguishable from a modern person. If he grew up in today's world, presumably he could be a fine banker, waiter, or lawyer. Ralph is considered a modern Homo sapiens in appearance, but he did have a rather unusual visage. When I asked Duke University archaeologist Stephen Churchill if Ralph would have gathered any stairs walking down a modern sidewalk, He says Ralph would have had a somewhat more masculinized face than that of a modern man. The primary difference, Churchill says, would have been a brow ridge that protruded to a degree rarely seen today. Brow ridges vary in size between person to person today, but even large, modern ridges pause in their protrusion above the nose. Ralph's would have taken no such break and extended fully for the width of his face. Endocrinologists believe this stern feature was the result of a stronger shot of testosterone than typically occurs in modern humans. Thus, a brow ridge is interpreted as a sign of aggression. Recent research suggests these ridges don't recede until approximately 80,000 years ago, when our ancestors began valuing an eyebrow's motions, and thus the ability to express dynamic temperaments over permanent orneriness. Ralph would have had a stern and intimidating look, Churchill tells me, but other than that, I don't think there's much that one might notice as different from people today. By the time of his great invention, Ralph was likely an older, more influential member of his group. He spent his days hunting with spears, spear throwers, and slings, although he was typically unsuccessful. He wielded a sophisticated rock tool set, which included hide scrapers, hand axes, and spear points, but he also manipulated organic materials such as vines, which he used for rope, and animal hides, which he used for bedding. He fought with other groups of Homo sapiens and other archaic hominins over resources or food, or maybe just out of fear. On his hunts, if he happened to successfully kill the warthog or deer, he shared it first with his kin and then among his group. If no one brought home meat that day, he ate tubers and roots and possibly grumbled about it. He spent his evenings gossiping around campfires, and at night he told stories about the stars. He smiled and laughed and played with his children. And though he did all of this naked, he wasn't cold. Cold is a challenge for Homo sapiens because our physiological responses, namely shivering and rerouting blood pressure, are, as the archaeologist Ian Gilligan puts it, sluggish and ineffective. Which is, of course, why most mammals are furry. The rabbit, for example, can withstand temperatures of as low as 49 degrees below zero, but shave its fur, and that number rises to 32 above zero. This is why the million-year gap between the loss of fur and the use of clothing is so surprising. Other largely naked land-based mammals live either underground or, like the elephants, have small surface to weight ratios that keep them warm. No other primate has as little fur as we do. How could warm-blooded, unclothed Homo sapiens survive with no fur? The answer is the reason hominins lost their fur in the first place: fire. Hominins survived for the better part of 1,000,000 years with neither clothes nor fur by lighting fires. Armed with fire, clothing becomes surprisingly inessential in all but the coldest of environments. Ethnographic observations of a few hunter-gatherer cultures prove it. When the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan first sailed along the southern coast of South America, where the mountains are covered in year-round snow and the glaciers slide into the sea, his sailors discovered the people of the Yagan and Alaculif tribes living quite comfortably without clothing. To stay warm, they coated themselves in animal grease and made heavy use of campfires, so much so that the sailors named it Tierra del Fuego, Land of Fire. It's not as if the idea of clothing never occurred to the Yagan or the Alaculif. They frequently warred with their clothed neighbors, the Ona people. They apparently just didn't find clothing necessary. The same is true for the Aboriginals of Tasmania, who also made little use of clothing, yet lived in far colder climes than Ralph. Clothing is not what anthropologists refer to as a human universal. It is not ubiquitous across human cultures as the control of fire is. However, decorating oneself, be it through painting, tattoos, earrings, or body modifications, is. Members of every human culture ever observed, from the uncontacted tribes of Papua New Guinea to Wall Street bankers, decorate themselves in some way. And because of this ubiquity, anthropologists assume humans today share this trait with all Homo sapiens cultures. The Yaghan had little use for clothing, but they wore elaborate capes, bracelets, and necklaces painted their faces and bodies. Individualization, anthropologists believe, is as basic a human need as food and shelter. This deeply human truth suggests Ralph's inspiration probably did not come from a need for warmth, and certainly did not evolve from any modern Western ideals of modesty. Instead, it came from the source of human desires that inspired the necklace, the tattoo, and the earring. In other words, Ralph's original piece of clothing was a fashion item. Vanity is a powerful motivator for technological innovation, and Ralph is far from alone in inventing something that initially served little practical purpose than to service his own. Anthropologists call inventions like these prestige technology because they function largely to bequeath status upon their users. Many of humanity's greatest inventions, including most metals, pottery, and fabrics, originated as difficult to produce items that offered little practical advantage over alternatives. Yet they were in demand, thanks largely to the difficulty of crafting them, which created a scarcity and thus a value. It was only later, through improvements in manufacturing, that products like copper and bronze gained practical usefulness. Such may have been the case with Ralph and his clothing. Ralph's invention may have started as something as impractical as a necktie, but it filled a deep human need, and over time it evolved into a critical piece of equipment that later Homo sapiens used to survive in the extreme cold of the northern latitudes. By the time Homo sapiens advanced into Europe 50,000 years ago, they likely wore highly sophisticated furs and lined jackets. The bones in their archaeologic sites suggest they preferentially hunted wolverines, an animal that provides little meat but whose pelts would have been prized as insulation. The oldest image archaeologists have found of clothing is a 24,000-year-old carving of a person wearing a close-hooded, highly practical parka. But practicality came late to the invention of clothing. Whatever piece of clothing Ralph invented, it was closer to the bow tie than the shirt. Maybe he needed something to wear into battle, when Homo sapiens often take extra care to look intimidating. Or maybe he was leading an initiation ceremony and required something to stand out. Perhaps his clothing was as simple as the shoulder-covering cape that the Yaghan occasionally wore. Or maybe it was something even less practical and more extravagant. The ethnographic record so abounds in hilariously impractical human clothing choices, from wigs to bow ties to phallic shields. It's folly to guess what Ralph might have come up with. We do know that whatever it was, it eventually became fashionable, occasionally even essential, and the long decamped parasite living atop human heads took notice of this new layer of removable fur. A few head lice braved the new fibers for a chance to return to their ancient feeding grounds, where they have thrived ever since. And that is the end of chapter 4. Thank you. Please like and subscribe.